Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser, and welcome back to the Journey of My Mother's Son podcast. Today I'm joined with Tyler Foley, who is an accomplished film and stage performer, has been in acting and film since he was 6 years old. Tyler, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, it's my joy and my pleasure, Dan, and thank you for having me on.
No problem. So tell my audience a little bit, who is Tyler Foley?
Oh, that's a very veiled question. I am a father, a husband, a son, natural born performer, entrepreneur, number one best-selling author of The Power to Speak Naked, seeker of warm beaches, lover of fine chocolate, and general crazy person whenever I get a chance.
Yeah, that's awesome. So tell me a little bit. You've been in acting since you were 6 years old. How did that start?
Um, I don't know. I I know the first time I was on stage, and it was for a Christmas pageant for my elementary school in the first grade. I got to play Joseph in the school nativity, and that was, I mean, I was hooked from there. But I was a born performer. Like, if you ask my mom, I was tap dancing in the womb, and even before I was ever on stage, I was that kid who, whenever there was a family meal or dinner, and extended relatives were over, or mom and dad were having a party or something like that, I would be the one who was always trying to entertain the adults. Whether it was, I remember getting a magic kit when I was like 3 or 4 years old, real simplistic stuff too, like hovering egg in an egg cup, and I think you could pass a card through a picture frame, a couple of sleight of hand card tricks and coin magic, and always trying to show everybody how to do that, how to make a dime dissolve into my forearm and things like that. And it was something that I was just always wanted to do. I liked the attention, I think. And so stage just became a thing. I got to be on stage Christmas of 1985. And then my father unfortunately passed away 2 months later. And I don't know if mom was looking for an outlet for me or if she needed a break for herself. But I got very rapidly into professional theater after that. And I've never looked back. I've been involved in the industry now going on my fourth decade. So it's been fun.
So at what point in your life did it kind of click for you that, being in the spotlight, being on stage, was more than just a hobby for you, where you wanted to turn it into a vocation? When was it when it was like, man, I'd love to get paid for this?
Well, the funny thing is I'd always been getting paid for it from the time I was six. Was the first time I ever earned a paycheck as an actor. But the first time I kind of went, this is what I want to do and nothing else, would have been around high school, likely. I went to a fine arts high school, majored in musical theater, minored in television arts. And I distinctly remember thinking, man, this is fun. I can do this. And having that realization, especially at that point, because I was billeted when I went to my high school. And I needed to earn money, and luckily I was earning money, and I realized like I could pay my rent if I needed to doing this. And then what really solidified it was when I was 17, New Year's Day 1997. I woke up and the left side of my body was paralyzed. I'd had some kind of medical incident over the night. And the true irony of it is I was dead sober New Year's Eve, because I was the designated driver. So I was driving people around. And so it wasn't even a case of substances causing the paralysis. It was literally something. And to this day, it's medical mystery. We don't know what happened, if it was a palsy or some kind of a stroke or mini stroke or what. There was no clear medical diagnosis for me. But what I do know is that it took over a year for me to gain full function back. And even that is not, I used to have a much more symmetrical face. I know, because I have thousands of headshots and photos of me. And particularly as I start to age, I really notice when I'm tired or fatigued, or if my health is, if I'm getting run down and my immune system is temporarily compromised, I can really notice where the left and the right side don't hold the same symmetry that they used to.
Oh,
And that's usually a good sign for me to drink a lot of water, get some more greens into my body, and go see a chiropractor. And then it tends to balance out quite nicely. But that moment, particularly being off school for 2 weeks over the Christmas break, and not being around my friends, and then returning to school and looking 1,000% different than what I had when I had gone on Christmas break, and having to withdraw from the final production of the school, the final musical production that I was in, because it was a very tap intensive production. So if you can't dance, you can't be in the show. And really at that point, having it all taken away, or at least I felt like at the time the career had been taken away, and that really made me want to do it even more. So that was my motivation to really work on the physiotherapy and the rehab, get my body working again so that I could once again get back into the arts and feel alive again, really.
yeah. And how difficult was that recovery period for you, mentally, as you're working back toward that goal?
Initially, really hard. It was really hard to measure progress at first. But I'm lucky I had an amazing medical team, headed by Dr. Bob Corbett and Dr. Joanne Corbett. And they did a lot to work on both my physical health as well as my mental health. Bob did a really good job of helping me find metrics to track and to show progress, and that progress was happening, because I couldn't feel it. And so he was able to chart back and be like, well, this is where you were a week ago, and this is where you were 2 weeks ago. This is where you were when you first came to see me, and there is incremental growth there. And that was helpful. And he helped me find the grace in each situation, which was one of the most valuable life lessons I could ever learn, and I've carried with me going forward. And Joe did just such a beautiful job of just making me not feel broken. And but I know initially it was hard. I literally woke up in a very dark place, because as a theater geek, one of my most comforting places is on stage. And anybody who's been in theater knows that a blank stage, an empty stage, is just a big black box. And it's a place that being in that environment is comfortable to me. So when I moved into my high school bedroom in the downstairs of my mother's house, it was actually an extension that was on the outside. And so I was concrete walls on all four walls. And to make them feel less like industrial, I painted it black because that's comfort to me, a big black room. And so when I woke up New Year's Day, 1997, I was literally in a cold black hole, and stayed there because that was my room. And I mean, my environment physically matched my mental state. It was very dark. It was very cold initially. And I was just very lucky to have a lot of very supportive people who could show me that not only was there light, but there was grace. And, it could have been worse. It could always be worse. And as much as I didn't want to admit it, it could have been worse. It could have been a stroke.
Right.
I could have been paralyzed for the rest of my life. Or worse, I could have not woken up New Year's Day.
Right.
And all of those things were those minor blessings that are really hard to see when you're in the eye of the storm.
Yeah.
But once those clouds pass, I look back and I'm grateful for the experience.
Yeah. So when you woke up that morning, I mean, what was your first reaction? I mean, obviously had no idea what was going on. You hadn't been drinking the night before. So, I mean, like, what was there? And again, you were young. You were a young kid at the time.
So my initial reaction was stunned astonishment because I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't. I Have you ever fallen asleep on like your arm, and you wake up and it's that total numb feeling, and you're like, oh, what is this?
Yeah.
Right? I do that quite regularly, so I figured that's just what I had done. That I'd fallen asleep oddly. I did not sleep alone in my bed that night, so I was definitely trying to accommodate another human being in a very awkward fashion, and so I just figured that I had, cut off the circulation to my arm, and that I'd just shake it off, and it would come back with the bad pins and needles, and then life would go on. And so I remember having to do this weird kind of shuffle to get up the stairs, still not thinking anything of it. And it wasn't until I started brushing my teeth that I realized that anything was off, because I was brushing my teeth and I felt like a drop hit my chest. But and when I looked down, I had drool and toothpaste all down my chest, but I could only feel it, this little tiny one spot on the side. And I looked up and I had toothpaste that was pouring, literally pouring and foaming out of the one side of my mouth. And I couldn't figure out why I couldn't feel that. Like, that would to me seem like a very obvious thing. Like, when you drool, So I couldn't figure out why I couldn't feel it. I couldn't figure out why it was happening. And I just remember kind of looking in the mirror. And when you squint into the mirror, I tried squinting, but my one eye didn't close. And so I'm doing this, and now I'm having this weird kind of ocular sensation, and everything just was off, and I couldn't figure it out. And my mom kind of looked at me from the kitchen. She was cooking breakfast. And she goes, "Tyler, are you drunk?" I said, "Mom, I was the DD last night." She goes, "Yeah, but what's wrong with you?" And I turned, and as soon as I turned, and she could see the drooping, and I couldn't really see it. And she said, "We have to get you to the hospital." And I didn't know what was going on, and so we went and to the hospital, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong either. Like I said, I spent 2 weeks getting tests done and scans. I've got really cool images of my brain, by the way. I kept them. My brain is remarkably circular. Like, I thought it would be more oblong.
Right.
But I have a remarkably round head, and I've always been fascinated by that. And I have these big ears, and those show up in the MRI. Like, you can see my ears out to here, and a very, very round brain. So, bonus, I got to see the inside of my skull long before anybody else probably would have.
There you go. There you go. So after the rehab for a year there, once you got back on stage, what was that feeling like for you?
It would, I mean, it's undescribable. Anybody who's ever been on stage and has got a standing ovation knows exactly what I mean. There is a magic that comes through any space with a live audience that just can't be replicated or duplicated. And the funny thing is I actually did less and less stage after my recovery, and did more and more film and television. And it wasn't for, I think when I was in Ragtime, and I also did My Fair Lady, one with was a live event production, and I had a residency at the Ford Theater in Vancouver for almost, I think it was 14 months was that run. And then I think in some point in there, I had done My Fair Lady with the Greater Vancouver Operatic Society. And I think that ended up being the last musical that I did for almost 2 decades. And then recently I was in a production called Feather Pen Fairy Tales, which was an original musical scored and written by an incredible artist, Marin Burnham, Marin Ord, as she's professionally known. And that was the first time where I got to really get back on stage and sing. And I'd done a couple of other like off stage shows. I did a couple of Shakespeare productions for different local companies. So I did the Scottish play, whose name we don't say unless you're doing the Scottish play. I did Richard III, and I did Hamlet at various times over the last 2 decades. But I didn't really do a lot of stage until more recently, and now it's become a focus now that I'm of my own independent wealth that I've created for myself to allow me to take on some more hobby things and produce some of these things. And now I'm producing another one of Marin's productions called The Gardener. I don't even know if I'll be in it. I'm just the executive producer right now, and making sure that play sees the light of day and the audience that it needs to have.
It's cool. So transitioning between the stage and then, film and TV, what is that like? And like, what's kind of the mindset between the two? Because obviously on stage, like, you screw up, everybody sees it. On film and TV, it's like, cut, action again, let's redo that line. So what's the mindset like going into those two different arenas?
For me, there was no real difference. There's obviously differences, but from a mindset perspective, how I approached each role was no different. I'm always of a single take mentality anyway. And if we have to do multiple takes, it's not because of anything that I've done, is what I hope. It isn't always the case, but it's always my
That's
goal.
what you hope.
It's always my hope. It is always the goal. It's always what I'm striving for. So I'm somebody who likes to do my prep work ahead of time. And at the same time, I like to do the prep work so that at that point, the lines are secondary to the performance, and I can really play with people. Like that's the joy of being an actor. I just recently got to do a Hallmark production, one of those made-for-TV Christmas movies with Shannon Elizabeth, which was an absolute riot for me because I've actually worked with her 3 times now, or rather I've worked on a production that she's been in 3 times now. But this is the first time that I actually got to share a scene with her and actually perform with her. So that was interesting because the last time we would have been on set together would have been almost 2 decades ago. And so it was, again, it was a bit surreal, but for me, there is no difference in my mindset and my prep work. I'm coming to give a role. Usually the difference is the time frame in which I'm given to do that preparation, because with theater, you're usually anywhere from 4 weeks to 4 months worth of rehearsal before you're taking the stage. And in fact, I auditioned for a really interesting staging of Ragtime again here in Calgary that Theatre Calgary was putting on, and they had a compressed schedule because it was just Ragtime in concert, so that there was a performance element, but it was really just the singing. And so because it was primarily choral based, they only had 2 weeks of rehearsal that was scheduled, but that's still a significant amount of time, where with a film and television role, I might be auditioning on a Tuesday and getting the call on a Friday that I booked it wardrobe on Monday and then on set Tuesday or Wednesday. Like, you get your sides the day before.
Right.
Oftentimes they change the day before too. So you're getting a new script handed to you and you're like, here, memorize this. So the memorization process is different for me, film and television versus stage, but the approach to the craft, the approach to the character, getting to play with other humans is always the same.
That's cool. So, you got this career going on, you're being successful, and you start this group for training. Why did you feel it was important to to do that, to start your Endless Stages training group?
So here's the thing. I believe that we all have something to contribute to the world. And some of us get to discover that earlier in life, and some of us discover it later in life, but we all have something to give back. And I've always struggled, by always, I mean, for the last, probably 15 years, I've really wondered what my contribution was going to be, especially after my daughter was born, almost 7 years ago now. And I've got this one skill set. I'm really, really good at speaking on stage. Not necessarily the best actor in the world, but I can speak well from stage. I am very compelling, very convincing, very engaging. I've always been very articulate, and stage is a place where I'm comfortable. And that is my gift. And it doesn't do any good if you don't share that gift with people. And I struggled for a long time being a pitchman and saying other people's words, whether that was doing it in a movie and doing something fictional, or on a stage and doing something fictional, or whether it was literally being a pitchman and being paid to do like infomercial stuff, or promote somebody else's products. I've had a few very well-known speakers who are titans within the industry, who have hired me to be kind of there when I can't show up to this event. You go and show up at the event, and I will train you to be mini me. And for a while, I thought that was a great thing to do, but it wasn't doing anything for me, and it really wasn't serving the audience the best way that I could. I was pitching somebody else's product. And what I found was that when I took the time to really ask myself, what advice do I give the most often? Like, what do people come and ask me about? That I discovered it is the public speaking. Everybody always asks, how do you do it? How can you be so comfortable? How can you hop on a call with Dan and not have rehearsed anything and just speak? And for me, I'm like, well, how can you not speak? You just tell your story. Everybody has a story, and nobody knows your story better than you. And so I started paying attention to not only who was asking me the advice and what advice they were asking, but what my responses back were. And another acquaintance of mine who I've spoken a few times with in various venues had approached me, Michael Harris, and he said, listen, I've been watching what you've been doing, especially now that you're promoting the book. And he's like, I have this idea. What if we created a free group where we could support people who want to be speakers? And I said, yeah, okay. I'm starting to like the idea of that. And the more we talked about it and the more narrow we got, the more I realized one of the bits of advice that I often give and then wasn't following myself is, your target audience is you 5 years ago, 5 or 10 years ago. Like, where were you at? What did you need to know? What did you already know? What were you struggling with? And what advice do you wish you had been given, or would you give yourself now? And that's all I needed to do. And so this group really grew out of me wanting to give back to help Tyler 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, really achieve what I have done, what I've gotten to now, and where I get to live a life by design where, if I want to take the day off and take my daughter to the amusement park, or I want to take her skating, or we want to go into the mountains, or we want to go on a nature hike, my time freedom is very flexible now. She gets to travel with me for work. Like, that's one of the things that I'd always, since my wife and I were married, I wanted to have that, where my work took us to cool places and we didn't have to pay to go on vacation. I was paid to go on vacation. And I wanted to show other people how to do this. And I also recognized that when I was starting out, the biggest barrier to entry for me to get into this and do it at a really high level and do it very professionally was money. Like, I couldn't pay the coaches the $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 to learn how to do it. Now, I had a base skill set, but there was a lot that I didn't know that I needed to learn. And that's why we created this group, so that there was a free resource for people to come to, so that they could get my whole everything, 30 plus years of experience on stage. And this is how you use it effectively to communicate your message.
Love that. I love that. And I mean, that really resonates with me because I've pretty much spent my entire life, coaching youth sports and mentoring and, giving back. So I love when I hear, people, who also want to give back, regardless of what field that may be in, or, what the highest level of accomplishment they had. So I really love that. I think that's great. They also wrote the book, which I love the title of it, "The Power to Speak Naked." Um, tell me a little bit about the book. What I'm an author as well. So what was it that inspired you? On top of everything else you were doing, acting on stage, on screen. Now let's go and write a book as well.
Well, I mean, the power to speak naked is know the beauty of a diamond through the eyes of a coach, but it's close. I tried really hard to something that was of on a similar caliber, but really what it came down to, I wanted to speak on bigger stages. I've had there, and I'm willing to admit, some of this is out of service and some of this is out of ego. And part of the bigger stages is the ego. Like, I know that I'm good enough, but anytime I feel that, I remember even I was valedictorian of my college, and it came about because my wife had graduated 2 years previous, and I remember watching the valedictorian, who was doing a decent address, and thinking to myself, "Oh man, I could do better." And as soon as I thought that, I'm like, "Oh, hey, easy now. That man is doing a decent job, and if you think you could do it better, go and do it." And I was like, "Well, maybe I do go and do that." And I made it a 2-year quest to become valedictorian. And for me, I know I have the ability to play on the stage with the greats, and I know because I have now. But the only reason I've been able to is because I had the book. Like, that's one of those prerequisites to the bigger stages. You need to have a book. You need to have an ability to teach and give back to any promoter's audience. And that's always their first thing, right? Because it's that first introduction to you. You get to talk for free. And now if people want more, how do they work with you? Well, it's usually a book or one of your courses. And if you don't have either of those things to offer, the large stages just aren't going to have you on. And I always had the course because I've been teaching public speaking in some way, shape, or form since I was a TA back in high school. And I've, professionally, even with my safety consulting business, the book itself came from an adaptation of a course that I created, that I was teaching to construction supervisors and managers on how to lead better toolbox talks and morning meetings and safety meetings. And really it was public speaking 101. And so because I'd had this course, I essentially took that course, transcribed the audio, and then compiled it into 10 easy to follow along chapters. And that's how the power to speak naked came to be. But part of it was, I got tired of saying the same thing over and over and over again. It was easier to just hand somebody a book and say, "Well, here, read this, and if you need anything else, come back and talk to me." And it was one of those things that was a necessity for my career to evolve to the point where it is right now.
Right. So you said that, between stage and on screen, your mindset, your approach isn't a whole lot different. What about in a true public speaking atmosphere? Is there a different type of mindset you go into that when you are the sole performer on the stage in that moment?
Only in that I am more acutely aware than I would be in any of the other forms that I have a responsibility to the audience that is there. I've grown up always knowing that without the audience, I'm not a performer. And without the audience, I'm not a speaker. Without the audience, I don't have my career, my vocation, my lifestyle, my life. And so I am always very aware of making sure that that audience comes first. Whatever the audience is, that that audience is being served first and foremost, and then everything else becomes superfluous to that. And whether that was on stage doing a musical or doing a theatrical production, whether that was in front of a camera doing film or television, the audience was always there, and I was aware that without them, I don't have the job. But now, public speaking, it's doubly or triply so, maybe even tenfold, where I have to serve them, or they don't come back. And I have to serve them or they don't trust me. And I have to serve them or they don't buy from me. And I don't do it for free.
Right.
Tyler needs to get paid, but I'm not going to get any value exchange from them if I don't give the value first, if I don't keep them first and foremost in my mind, in my presentations and everything that I do. If I'm not serving that audience, then why would they, never mind that they're not going to, why would they even open up their wallets to me and invite me into that form of transaction, that exchange, if I haven't given them something first? So it definitely has made me hyper aware of my audience's needs. It's also really allowed me to define what my audience is and who I'm actually speaking to. Because as a born performer, I would tell you I can speak to anybody, and I've had diverse crowds that I've spoken to, but I know where my audience actually is now. I know what my less than 1% who I'm really, really speaking to each time are, and making sure that they, above all, are served.
Yeah. So going into the production realm, where you're working now, what's that setting like for you? Because again, I'm kind of assuming that you again are a little bit of a coach in that role, to the actors that you're working with. And well, I'll let you answer that question before I get to the next one.
Well, I don't know that I'm so much as of a coach, because that's really what the director is there for. And they tend to get mad when you take them off on a vision. I'm there to support the overall production. Now that I'm producing theater, I'm there to make sure that first and foremost that the playwright and the director get along and their vision is shared, because nothing's worse than if a playwright hands over their work that they've worked on, that they've, because they're the first one to see the play, right? Because they've played it out in their mind, and then they turn it over to a director, and the director does something totally different than what they had planned. And maybe it's genius, maybe it's great, maybe it's wonderful, but it's not what the playwright wanted. And so for me as a producer right now, it's marrying the two so that the playwright is thrilled beyond belief at what their work, their final product looks like on stage, and that the director is on board with what that playwright's vision is, and they're working together towards the same goal as opposed to opposite goals. And then my job is just to make sure that all the resources are there, time, people, money, and that we have the right team supporting the environment in the right way. We become the Princeton crew and we row and sink. Yeah. And 8-man skulls, let's go.
Yeah. Have you ever had a situation where you had to be referee between playwright and director where they weren't on the same page? And how'd that work out for you?
Yes, and it didn't. And the production suffered for it. I mean, it was a great learning lesson, but it was one of those producer, because I wasn't I was just an executive producer. And I know that sounds like that's a higher title, but I wasn't, because I wasn't the money man. Executive producer is just there as they couldn't afford my services as an actor, so I was taking a back end credit, and was making money off of the back end, and then further was providing some of the resources in the form of connections and support to make sure that the production went up. But that was that one production there was conflicts right from the beginning because the producer, the money man, I'm not sure why he ended up hiring the director that he hired, but him and her did not see eye to eye. There was no conflict with the playwright because the playwright died 400 years ago. But there was definitely a conflict with how to bring those words forward and what the end goal and end vision of the production was. And there was no cajoling the two, and it ended up costing me both financially and professionally because the show did not go well, and subsequently there was not a lot of tickets sold to it, and my paycheck was dependent on a successful run. So for all of those reasons, it didn't work out the way that I would have hoped it would have.
Yeah. Going back to the giving back that we'd talked about earlier, and you wanting to help others, was there people along the way that mentored you throughout your career, and is that part of why you want to give back as well?
Definitely. And I mean, even in my book, I was actually just on a podcast with a former teacher, and it was the first thing that she picked up on was the fact that outside of my family, the first acknowledgments that I have are all 6 of my elementary school teachers in order. And they, if it were not for them, I wouldn't have had this. Like, I think of Mrs. Nielsen, and she put me into my first couple of plays, both the Christmas pageant and then the Easter production. I got to play Joseph and then Peter Rabbit, and those are the stars. She was the one that really encouraged my mom, who was a friend because my father was a teacher before he passed away. And so Judy knew my mom socially and not just as my teacher, and saying, Tyler, he has a gift here. And, I think mom was always kind of aware of my performance nature and my, and how I wasn't afraid of people or public interactions. And so to have that kind of encouragement, I think was critical in my development. And then it goes on from there, Mrs. Henderson putting me in the regional speech competitions and winning those regional speech competitions, and George Stone putting me in the senior school, or the senior production in the elementary school, and really encouraging me. And then into junior high, Erin Weeb taking me under her wing and really showing me what could be done as a dramaturg, and then introducing me to the Alberta High School of Fine Arts, as well as the Arts Trek program, where I got to go to theater camp, which sounds so nerdy now, but man, I didn't realize, I thought I was a king going there. I was just on top of the world when I got to do it. And then and then all the rest of that, like all the people who have given back, Bob and Joe Corbett, their son and daughter, Jason and Vanda, and how much they've contributed to me in my life. All of my uncles, like there's so many people who have played a role in where I am. And a lot of why I get to be a leader is just because I'm loud and articulate. And so I want to show other people that they can be loud and articulate as well, and tell their story and do a little bit more good than, especially with what I do, because it's so meta. I talk to people about how to talk to people so that they can talk to people better. Like, that's so when I try to explain it to people, I love it when those posts come up on Facebook, explain your job poorly. I talk to people about talking to people, because that's what I do. And so, yeah, I find great satisfaction when I see people I've tutored or mentored go on and do amazing things with their story on stage. And then I can see where my ripple begins, because again, I'm meta, I'm talking about talking, but other people have some really powerful messages that if they can get over that initial fear of judgment and even sometimes shame about their story, and they can say the thing that they're afraid to say, hence the power to speak naked, that's what drives me, is to show people that their story can have impact and really make a difference in the world.
Yeah, no, and I can relate to that a lot because, since my wife and I have been traveling around the country and living in an RV, we've been able to connect with a lot of my old players and seeing what they've done. And again, I mean, I always took the approach to coaching baseball and softball as, it was more than about just the wins and losses. It was about teaching these kids, life lessons and leadership skills. And it's almost, like now, we don't always get to see the fruits of our labor, and now when I'm traveling around and I connect with, two of my players in Arizona and another one in Georgia and some in Maryland and, literally scattered throughout the country, and you're listening to what they've done, in life, you can really take pride in that. So I can really relate to what, you're saying and, what you get out of that as a person. So I love that. We're just about out of time, but anything that we didn't cover that you want to bring up?
No, other than the fact that you and I seem to be on the same touring schedule, because right now I'm looking at where I can hold my next events in Phoenix and Atlanta. So I'm like, you're in Arizona and Georgia. Why those two? Because those are my two right now. That's what I'm trying to do. No, I just want to say thank you so much, Dan, for having me on. It to be able to have these conversations is paramount in my life, to be able to show people that you can get on these platforms and speak. And so I've got to lead by example. And so I'm always appreciative of any host who's willing to have me on the show. And hopefully that the people who are listening to the journey of my mother's son are getting value out of this conversation. And I look forward to more with you if we get the opportunity.
Absolutely. So how do people get a hold of Tyler now? If anybody wants to get into your class, where's the book available at? Give yourself a little shameless plug here.
Well, the shameless plug will come, but only if your audience can do me a favor first. And that is, they were listening to you long before they were listening to me. And if they're coming back and they're listening to you regularly over and over again, there's got to be a reason for it. And if they have not done so already, I would ask for them to hit pause on whatever device that they're listening to this on and give you a 5-star review. And be specific. What was an episode that they enjoyed? Why do they come back and listen to your show, so that you can bring guests on that will help them. So it's helping them, really, right? Let us help you by giving a 5-star review for Dan, and let them know what really what the content that you like is. And if you're willing to do that, then I would invite you to come over to my website, which is SeanTylerFoley.com. And Sean is spelled the proper Irish way, SeanTylerFoley.com. And there you can find everything. We're just in the midst of updating the website right now, because the website is very landing page heavy to direct people over to Endless Stages. But if they do take advantage of coming over to Endless Stages, it's a free Facebook group. I come live every Tuesday at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern, and give a 20-minute live training session on whatever the topic of the week happens to be. The topic is pulled from discussions that we're holding within that group. So the more active people participate in it, the more likely their questions are to be answered. And by joining through the website, I'll also give you a free PDF download of my #1 best-selling book, Power to Speak Naked. And we give you access to my virtual training course, which is called Drop the Mic. And that's a real easy, simple, follow along at your own pace training to get a little bit better, a little bit more comfortable public speaking. But again, Dan, none of that is available to them if they're not willing to hit pause on the device, because they got to hit pause to go to the show notes to find the link to the website anyway. So while they're there, before you hit my link, hit Dan's link, give it a 5-star review, and then come on over to the website and you can find out all things about Tyler Foley and what I'm up to.
I appreciate that. I have to hire you as a marketing guy for me. So that brings us to our final question. As I told you, the subtitle of the podcast is Many Little People in Many Little Places. And that comes from the opening lyrics of a Michael Franti song, Gloria, which go, when many little people in many little places do many little things and the whole world changes. So it's one of the things that Tyler does on a daily basis to make the world a little bit better place.
Make sure to hug my daughter, and then make sure that whoever I'm interacting with that day has my full attention. And as long as I do those two things, usually in combination, I think I leave the world a little bit better. It's always my goal, right? If I'm going for a hike in the woods, I'm going to pick up a little bit of trash, leave the place a little bit cleaner than where I found it. And I always believe that after every interaction, I should be leaving the human beings that I touch a little bit better than where I found them. And if all it is just me paying attention and being a sympathetic ear, then that's what I do.
Love that. I love that. So folks out there listening, be sure to check out my other podcasts and blogs at danclouser.com. Hop on over to Amazon, pick up a copy of the most recent book, The Journey of My Mother's Son, Volume 1, or The Beauty of a Diamond Through the Eyes of a Coach. While you're surfing around Amazon, head over, pick up Tyler's book as well. And, Tyler, appreciate the time and really appreciate the conversation. Had a lot of fun.
Thanks, Dan.
You bet.